a choice, a memory, a sudden, unbidden flash of insight that rearranges your entire understanding of a problem. Where does it come from? Not the electrical signal, not the chemical cascade, but the times experience times itself. The ghost of a melody you can't quite place, the intuitive leap that saves a life, the profound and unshakable feeling of being times you asterisk. For millennia, we have looked to the heavens for answers, charting the dance of galaxies and the birth of stars to understand our place in the cosmos. We have built cathedrals of mathematics and physics to decode the fundamental laws of reality, from the grand architecture of space-time to the frenetic subatomic fuzz at the very bottom of existence. Yet the greatest wilderness, the most profound and persistent mystery is not out there in the cold, silent void. It lies sealed within the vault of your own skull. Inside this gelatinous, wrinkled, 3-pound universe, an organ of astonishing complexity orchestrates a silent, ceaseless symphony. 100 billion neurons each, a living computational unit, are woven into a tapestry of such intricate density that a single cubic millimeter of your cortex contains more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. This is the engine of civilization, the source code for every poem, every equation, every act of cruelty, and every expression of love. It takes the raw, chaotic data of the world, photons striking a retina, pressure waves vibrating an eardrum, and transforms it into a seamless, unified, and subjective reality. It constructs your past, simulates your future, and anchors you in the vibrant immediate now. We have mapped its regions, traced its pathways, and listened to its electrical whispers, and the more we learn, the more the central enigma deepens. How does mere matter, a collection of fats, proteins, and salty water, achieve self-awareness? How does this biological machinery conjure the vibrant internal cinema of consciousness? For the better part of a century, our guiding metaphor, our most powerful tool for understanding this mystery has been the computer. It's an elegant and compelling idea. The neuron we proposed acts like a biological transistor, a simple switch. It receives signals from its neighbors, and if the combined input crosses a certain threshold, it fires its own signal down the line, a 1 or a 0, an on or an off. In this model, the brain is a classical information processor, a machine of breathtaking scale and parallelism, but a machine nonetheless. Thought is computation, memory is data storage. Consciousness, in this view, must be an emergent property of this immense deterministic cascade of cause and effect, a complex illusion generated by a sufficiently powerful network of simple logical switches. This framework, the computational theory of mind, has been the bedrock of neuroscience and artificial intelligence, and its successes are undeniable. It has allowed us to build machines that can learn to interface brains with electronics, and to begin untangling the neural basis of perception and behavior. It gave us a language, a blueprint, a way to grasp the seemingly infinite complexity within our heads. But for all its explanatory power, the classical model has always been haunted by phenomena it struggles to contain. It creaks and groans under the weight of human experience. Consider the flash of creative genius, the eureka moment that Archimedes experienced in his bath. It doesn't feel like a step-by-step logical deduction. It arrives whole, fully formed, a sudden reordering of an entire conceptual landscape. It feels less like a calculation and more like a revelation. Where in the binary sequential firing of neurons does such holistic insight reside? Or consider the nuanced, ambiguous, and context-dependent nature of human language. A single word can shimmer with a dozen different meanings, its interpretation shifting based on tone, history, and unspoken cultural understanding. Our minds navigate this sea of uncertainty with effortless grace, something that our most powerful classical supercomputers, for all their brute force processing power, find maddeningly difficult. They are masters of logic, but we are masters of meaning. The computational model struggles too with the very binding of reality itself. When you see a red ball flying through the air, different parts of your brain process the color, the motion, the shape, and the sound it might make upon impact. The classical view tells us these are separate streams of data processed in different neural modules, yet you don't experience a disconnected series of attributes. you experience a single unified object, a red ball. How does the brain bind these disparate computations into one indivisible, coherent moment of perception? This is the so-called binding problem, and it remains one of the most stubborn thorns in the side of classical neuroscience. These are not minor anomalies, they are deep foundational cracks in our most cherished theory. Intuition, creativity, holistic pattern recognition, the unified field of awareness, these quintessential aspects of the human mind seem to elude the simple step-by-step logic of a digital computer. The brain doesn't always seem to compute an answer. Sometimes it seems to simply times no asterisk. This growing collection of dissonant clues suggests a tantalizing, perhaps even terrifying possibility that we have been using the wrong operating manual all along. Perhaps the brain's fundamental processing language is not the simple binary logic of a transistor, but something infinitely stranger, more powerful, and more deeply connected to the fabric of reality itself. To find that language, we must take a journey to a place where all of our classical intuitions about the world break down. We must descend into the realm of the quantum. Down here at the smallest scales of existence, the comfortable, predictable rules of the world we know simply dissolve into a shimmering haze of probability. This is a universe that operates on a logic so alien it feels like a hallucination. In the quantum world, a particle like an electron doesn't exist in one specific place until it is measured. Instead, it exists in a ghostly state of pure potential, a superposition of all its possible locations and states at once, like a cloud of possibilities. A single particle can be in hundreds of places simultaneously. Reality, it seems, holds its breath, refusing to commit until the moment it is observed. Only then does this wave of potential collapse into a single definite outcome, as if the universe were rolling a subatomic die to decide its fate. And the strangeness only deepens from there. Quantum particles can become linked in a mysterious conspiracy known as entanglement. If you entangle two particles, they become in essence two parts of a single system, no matter how far apart you pull them. Measure a property of one particle here on Earth, and you will instantly know the corresponding property of its twin, even if that twin is on the other side of the galaxy. It is a connection that defies our concepts of space and time, a phenomenon Einstein famously dismissed as spooky action at a distance. This is not science fiction. This is the demonstrated, experimentally verified foundation of our physical world. Superposition, entanglement, quantum tunneling, uncertainty. These are not just bizarre theoretical concepts. They are the very rules that govern how matter and energy behave at their most fundamental level. We have already harnessed these bizarre properties to build technologies that were once unimaginable: lasers, transistors, MRI machines, and the nascent revolutionary field of quantum computing. A classical computer, the machine you are likely using to watch this, operates on bits, ones and zeros. It is a world of absolutes, of definite states. A switch is either on or it is off. A quantum computer, by contrast, operates on qubits. Thanks to the magic of superposition, a qubit can be a 1, a 0, or both a 1 times and times a 0 at the same time in any combination of probabilities. By linking these qubits together through entanglement, a quantum computer can explore a vast number of possibilities simultaneously. Instead of checking every path in a maze one by one, it can explore all paths at once. The potential computational power is staggering, promising to solve problems so complex they would take a classical supercomputer longer than the age of the universe to crack. This new form of computation is not just faster, it is fundamentally different. It is a logic built on probability, interconnectedness, and the simultaneous exploration of immense possibility spaces. And this brings us back full circle to the mystery inside our heads. For decades we have stared at the perplexing abilities of the human mind, its knack for intuition, its creative leaps, its effortless handling of ambiguity, and we have tried to explain them using the rigid binary logic of a classical machine. We have tried to fit the round peg of human consciousness into the square hole of digital computation. But what if we've been trying to solve the puzzle with the wrong pieces? What if the brain's uncanny abilities are not the product of an impossibly complex classical computer, but the signature of a different kind of processing altogether? What if the symphony of thought, the binding of perception and the flash of insight are not emergent properties of a neural network of switches, but are instead direct consequences of a biological machine that has evolved over millions of years. To harness the strange and powerful logic of the quantum world, this is the audacious, controversial, and utterly transformative hypothesis of quantum cognition. It is the proposition that somewhere deep within the warm, wet, and noisy environment of the brain, in the hidden molecular machinery of our neurons, quantum effects are not just present, they are essential. It suggests that the brain might be using superposition to hold conflicting ideas in mind at once, navigating the ambiguities of language and complex decision-making. It hints that quantum entanglement could be the key to the binding problem, the spooky action that links disparate neural processes into a single unified thread of conscious experience. It frames the moment of creative insight not as a final computational step, but as a quantum leap, the collapse of a wave of uncertain subconscious possibilities into a single, coherent, conscious solution. This is a radical departure from the mainstream of neuroscience. To many, it is scientific heresy, an attempt to explain one mystery consciousness with another quantum mechanics. The brain, they argue, is far too warm, wet, and chaotic to sustain the delicate, fragile quantum states that quantum computers require, which must be isolated and cooled to near absolute zero. Any quantum coherence, they insist, would be destroyed by the turbulent thermal environment of a living cell, almost instantly, far too quickly, to perform any useful computation. For a long time, these objections seemed insurmountable, relegating the idea of a quantum mind to the fringes of scientific inquiry. It was a beautiful, poetic idea, but one that seemed to defy the known laws of biology and physics. But science is a story of overturned certainties, and in recent years, a new wave of discoveries has begun to challenge these long-held assumptions. Biologists are finding startling evidence of quantum effects playing crucial roles in fundamental life processes, from the uncanny efficiency of photosynthesis in plants to the magnetic sense that guides migratory birds. These processes, it turns out, happen in environments that are just as warm, wet, and noisy as the human brain. Nature, it seems, has already figured out how to build and protect quantum machinery in the heart of the biological world. These discoveries have cracked the door open just enough for a new generation of physicists, biologists, and neuroscientists to peer through, asking a question that was once unthinkable: could the brain be doing it too? Is it possible that evolution, in its relentless 4-billion-year search for an advantage, stumbled upon the computational power of the quantum realm and built a thinking machine to exploit it? To even begin to answer this question, we must embark on an extraordinary scientific journey. We must venture past the familiar landscape of classical neuroscience and into a strange borderland where the biology of the mind meets the physics of matter. We will need to search for the brain's qubits, the specific molecular structures that might be capable of sustaining these quantum states. We will have to devise new experiments that can hunt for the subtle, fleeting signatures of quantum processing amidst the thunderous electrical noise of a living brain, and we will need to confront the profound philosophical implications of what we might find. For if the brain is indeed a quantum computer, it would reshape our understanding of everything. It would mean that the deepest, most counterintuitive level of reality is not just the substrate upon which we exist, but is actively woven into the very fabric of our thoughts, our feelings, and our sense of self. It would suggest that the mind is not a machine that observes the universe from the outside, but is a phenomenon that emerges from the same quantum weirdness that governs the stars. The journey ahead is one into the deepest questions of existence. What is the mind? What is matter? And how did a universe of unconscious particles give rise to a being that can look back and wonder at it all? The answers will not come easily. The path is fraught with technical challenges and fierce intellectual debate, but the stakes are nothing less than the very nature of human consciousness. To find out if we are classical machines or quantum dreamers, we must leave the familiar shore of established science and follow the evidence wherever it leads. Our first step is to search for a ghost in the machine, a place inside the neuron where the quantum world might have found a home. What is the most familiar yet most utterly alien object in the known universe? It is not a distant quasar pulsing with the energy of 1 trillion suns. It is not the swirling, violent heart of a black hole where space and time themselves surrender. No, the most profound mystery we have ever encountered sits protected within the silent darkness of your own skull. It is a mere 3 pounds of soft wrinkled tissue, a fragile vessel of water and fat and protein, yet it holds everything you are and everything you will ever be. It is the architect of your reality, the seat of your soul, the engine of your consciousness. It is the human brain. And for all our exploration of the cosmos, it remains our greatest uncharted territory, a universe within. For centuries, we have sought to map this inner cosmos to understand the mechanism that allows a simple collection of cells to compose a symphony, to dream of new worlds, to fall in love, or to simply perceive the warmth of the sun on skin. Our journey into its depths has been one of the grandest intellectual adventures in human history, an expedition that has yielded a breathtakingly elegant and powerful model of how we think. This is the classical paradigm, a mechanical marvel built not of gears and pistons but of sparks and whispers. It is a story of electricity and chemistry, of structure and function, a testament to the idea that even the ghost of consciousness can be captured in the machine of biology. At the heart of this grand machine is a single extraordinary protagonist, the neuron. There are 86 billion of them inside your head, a population of star-like cells forming a galaxy of thought. Each one is a marvel of biological engineering, a microscopic information processor. A neuron is a living wire, a cellular antenna with a long, slender axon reaching out across the cerebral landscape, and a crown of branching dendrites listening, always listening for messages from its neighbours. The language it speaks is the most fundamental in nature, the language of electricity. When a neuron is stimulated past a critical threshold, it does not simply relay a signal, it ignites. An electrochemical wave, an action potential surges down its axon, a controlled cascade of electrical fire, a whisper becoming a shout that travels at over 200 miles per hour. This is the binary code of the brain, the fundamental 1 or 0 of our internal world. A neuron either fires or it does not. It is a simple, unambiguous statement, but a single spark is not a thought any more than a single letter is a novel. The genius of the brain lies not in the neuron itself, but in its connections. Where one neuron's axon nearly touches another's dendrite, there is a space of infinitesimal smallness, a gap just 20 nanometers wide called the synapse. This microscopic chasm is where the true magic happens. It is the stage for a delicate and lightning-fast chemical ballet. When the electrical pulse reaches the end of the axon, it doesn't jump the gap. Instead, it triggers the release of tiny molecular messengers, chemicals we call neurotransmitters. These messengers flood across the synaptic gulf, a fleet of microscopic couriers carrying a specific instruction. They dock with specialized receptors on the neighboring neuron, fitting like a key into a lock, and in that moment of connection they deliver their message. Some, like glutamate, are excitatory. They are a command to fire, pushing the receiving neuron closer to its own electrical tipping point. Others, like GABA, are inhibitory, a gentle whisper of hush, making it less likely to fire. It is a system of pushes and pulls, of green lights and red lights, an intricate, ceaseless conversation happening billions of times every second across trillions of connections. This is the symphony of sparks, the chemical dance that underpins every sensation, every memory, every fleeting emotion you have ever experienced. From this simple set of rules, firing neurons and chemical synapses, an almost infinite complexity emerges. Neurons do not exist in isolation. They are woven together into vast, intricate networks, circuits of staggering sophistication. A single neuron can be connected to 10,000 others, creating a web of such density that the number of possible pathways, the number of potential circuits, exceeds the number of fundamental particles in the entire observable universe. This is not chaos. It is a dynamic living architecture. The connections themselves are not fixed. They are fluid plastic. The brain is constantly rewiring itself based on your experiences. The very act of learning, of forming a memory, is a physical process. A principle known as Hebbian learning elegantly describes this. Neurons that fire together wire together. When two neurons are active at the same time, the synaptic connection between them strengthens. The whisper between them becomes a more confident conversation. The pathway is reinforced, etched more deeply into the neural landscape. This is how a memory is born. A new experience, the scent of rain on hot asphalt, the melody of a forgotten song triggers a unique pattern of neural firing. As you recall the memory, that same pattern is reactivated, the connections strengthening with each use, transforming a fleeting sensation into a permanent part of your identity. It is a beautiful mechanical explanation for the storage of our past. Your life story is not written in ink, but in the ever-changing architecture of your synaptic connections. This classical computational model of the brain has been one of science's greatest triumphs. It has peeled back the veil on so many of our deepest questions. Armed with this understanding, we have mapped the great continents of cognition, identifying the regions responsible for language in Broca's area, for vision in the occipital lobe, for executive function in the prefrontal cortex. Using tools like functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRIs, we can literally watch the brain think, seeing blood flow to active regions like weather patterns moving across a map of the mind. We can witness the bloom of activity when you recognize a face, or the intricate firing that occurs when you solve a complex problem. The model has given us profound power. We can trace the devastating path of neurological disorders, understanding Alzheimer's disease as the tragic unraveling of this neural tapestry, Parkinson's as a deficit in the chemical messenger, dopamine and a stroke as a catastrophic power failure in a critical region, silencing a lifetime of memories and abilities in an instant. This knowledge has paved the way for treatments and therapies that can restore function, alleviate suffering, and offer hope where there once was none. The classical brain, this magnificent electrochemical computer, has proven to be a remarkably robust and predictive framework. It tells us that what we call the mind is the emergent property of this complex, interconnected system. There is no central command post, no little person sitting in a control room pulling levers. There is only the network. Thought is a pattern of firing. Emotion is a chemical tide. You are the sum total of your neural activity. It is a powerful, compelling, and for many a complete explanation. And yet, for all its power, for all its predictive elegance, there are shadows in this brightly lit room. There are persistent, haunting questions that the classical model, for all its successes, struggles to answer. These are not minor details at the fringe of neuroscience. They are enigmas that strike at the very heart of what it means to be human, cracks in the very foundation of our understanding. They suggest that the story of sparks and whispers, as beautiful as it is, may be incomplete. There may be a deeper layer to reality, a more fundamental set of rules operating within us that we have not yet begun to comprehend. The most profound of these is the so-called hard problem of consciousness. The classical model is brilliant at explaining the easy problems, how the brain processes information, how it focuses attention, how it retrieves memories. It can describe in exquisite detail the chain of events that occurs when light from a red rose hits your retina. It can trace the electrical signals from your eye through the optic nerve to the visual cortex, identifying the precise network of neurons that fires in response to the wavelength of red light. It can explain the times mechanism, times of perception, but it cannot explain the times experience asterisk. It cannot tell us why you, the observer, have an internal subjective feeling of redness. There is nothing in the physics of photons or the chemistry of synapses that predicts the emergence of this qualitative experience, this raw, ineffable feeling. How does the wet grey biological hardware of the brain produce the rich, immaterial, and intensely personal movie that is your conscious awareness? This is the great chasm between mechanism and meaning. The firing of a neuron is a physical event. The sorrow you feel at a loss, the joy of a reunion, the simple taste of salt on your tongue, these are conscious experiences. The classical brain model shows us the puppet strings, but it can never explain how the puppet times feels asterisk. It describes the machinery with breathtaking accuracy, but it leaves the ghost in the machine an unexplained spectre. Then there is the vexing puzzle of free will. In the classical deterministic universe of neurons and synapses, your every thought and action is the inevitable result of a preceding chain of events. A neuron fires because it received a specific chemical signal, which was sent because another neuron fired, and so on, in an unbroken chain of cause and effect stretching back to the moment you were born and beyond. If we could in principle know the state of every neuron and every synapse in your brain at a given moment, We could predict your next thought, your next decision, with the same certainty that we can predict the trajectory of a planet. In this framework, your subjective feeling of making a choice, of being the author of your actions, is a powerful and persistent illusion. You are not the driver. You are merely a spectator to a foregone conclusion, a story already written by the laws of physics and chemistry. But this clashes violently with our deepest intuition, the undeniable sense that we are in control, that we choose our path. Is our most cherished sense of agency simply a trick of the mind? And consider the brain's almost magical ability to handle ambiguity and context. A classical computer based on the same binary logic as the neuron would be paralyzed by a task your brain performs effortlessly in milliseconds. Look at a simple line drawing like the famous Necker cube. It is an ambiguous image. You can perceive it as a box viewed from above or as a box viewed from below. Your brain does not get stuck. It effortlessly flips between the two interpretations, holding both possibilities in a state of unresolved tension. Think of how you recognize a friend's face in a dimly lit, crowded room from an angle you've never seen before with a different haircut. A computer would need to crunch through millions of possibilities to find a match. Your brain does it instantly. It seems to grasp the context without getting lost in the parts. This suggests a form of computation that is fundamentally different from the step-by-step linear processing of the classical model. It is a computation that seems capable of holding multiple, even contradictory states of being in mind, at the very same time collapsing into a single definite perception only when it needs to. The classical brain, a machine of definite ones and zeros, struggles to account for this profound cognitive flexibility, this dance with uncertainty that defines so much of our mental life. The hard problem of consciousness, the illusion of free will, the mastery of ambiguity, these are not just unsolved puzzles. They are deep philosophical paradoxes that hint that our current map of the mind, as detailed as it is, might be showing us only the surface world, while a vast and mysterious ocean lies beneath. To navigate this ocean, we may need a new kind of chart, a new language to describe a reality far stranger than our intuition can grasp. For the last century, another scientific revolution has been brewing, one that has completely overturned our understanding of the physical world at its most fundamental level. It is the science of the very small, the subatomic realm, a world that seems to operate on principles of pure magic. It is the world of quantum mechanics, and it is a world that mocks our everyday logic with its bizarre and paradoxical rules. It is a place where a particle like an electron can be in multiple places at once, existing only as a haze of probability until the moment we look at it. It is a place where two particles can become mysteriously linked or entangled, so that a measurement of one instantly influences the other, even if they are separated by billions of miles of empty space, a phenomenon so strange that Einstein himself called it spooky action at a distance. It is a reality built not on certainty but on potential, not on definite states but on shimmering superpositions of possibility. For decades, this ghostly realm was thought to be utterly irrelevant to the warm, wet and messy world of biology. The brain, we were told, was far too large and complex to be governed by these delicate quantum effects. It belonged to the classical world of cause and effect. But what if it doesn't? What if the enigmas that haunt neuroscience are not failures of the classical model, but rather signposts pointing toward a deeper quantum truth? Could the brain's ability to hold ambiguous ideas in mind be the reflection of quantum superposition? Could the ineffable, holistic nature of consciousness arise from the strange interconnectedness of quantum entanglement? Could the very act of choice of collapsing a wave of potential futures into a single concrete present be the root of our sense of free will? These are radical, speculative, and for many heretical questions. They propose that to solve the mystery of the mind, we must abandon the familiar territory of classical physics. We must venture into the ghost-haunted landscape of the quantum and ask if the architects of our reality, the very neurons that build our world, are playing by a far stranger set of rules than we ever dared to imagine. And so we arrive at a profound and unsettling juncture. If the brain is a classical machine, a magnificent engine of logic, then its operations should be governed by the unwavering rules of classical probability. Its outputs should be predictable, consistent, its logic as reliable as the gears of a clock. Yet when we peer into the messy, brilliant, and often confounding reality of human decision-making, we find glitches in that classical code. We discover persistent, systematic anomalies that refuse to align with the world of pure reason. These aren't mere errors or emotional whims. They are deep structural patterns in our cognition ghosts, in the machine that hint at an entirely different operating system. To find them, we don't need to venture into the cosmos. We need only venture into ourselves. Consider the simple act of asking a question. In a classical world, a question is a neutral probe. It retrieves a pre-existing piece of information, a fact stored neatly in your mental filing cabinet. The order in which you ask two unrelated questions shouldn't matter. Asking if you like your job and then if you are happy with your life should yield the same results as asking those questions in reverse. The properties of job satisfaction and life happiness exist independently waiting to be reported. But they don't. In a famous 1997 study, researchers asked people two simple questions about two well-known politicians. First, is Bill Clinton honest and trustworthy? And second, is Al Gore honest and trustworthy? When asked in that specific order, the correlation between the answers was quite low. People's opinions of the two men appeared largely independent. But when the researchers simply reversed the order, asking about Gore first and then about Clinton, something remarkable happened. The correlation between the answers shot up dramatically. A positive view of Gore now strongly predicted a positive view of Clinton, and vice versa. What had changed? Not the questions, not the people, only the sequence. This is what psychologists call an order effect, and it is a flagrant violation of classical logic. It's as if measuring the length of a table somehow altered its width. The very act of measurement of asking the first question seemed to fundamentally change the cognitive state of the person answering. It reconfigured the internal landscape of their opinions, creating a new context in which the second question was then interpreted. The answer wasn't merely retrieved, it was constructed on the spot, influenced by the mental path taken to get there. For most of the 20th century, this was simply labeled a cognitive bias, a curious flaw in our mental software. But to a handful of renegade thinkers, this looked hauntingly familiar. It looked less like a bug in a classical computer and more like a core feature of a quantum one. In the quantum realm, this behavior isn't strange at all. It is the law. The order of measurements is paramount. If you measure the spin of an electron along the x-axis, you disturb its spin along the y-axis. The first measurement forces the particle out of its indefinite state of superposition and into a definite reality for that one property. This act of collapsing the wave function irrevocably alters the system, changing the probabilities for all subsequent measurements. The two properties are non-commutative. You cannot simply swap their order without changing the outcome. Could our thoughts behave in the same way? Is an unasked question like a particle in superposition representing a cloud of potential answers, a spectrum of feelings and beliefs all coexisting at once? When we are forced to answer, to make a judgment, are we collapsing that wave of potential into a single definite state? If so, then every choice, every opinion offered is not just a report of our inner world. It is an act of creation that changes that world forever. The mind under this lens is not a static library of facts, but a dynamic, shimmering quantum field constantly being shaped and reshaped by the probe of consciousness itself. This strange defiance of classical rules doesn't stop with the order of our thoughts. It extends to the very heart of how we reason about uncertainty. Imagine you have just taken a grueling final exam. Your final grade for the entire course hinges on this one test. To take your mind off the stress, you see a fantastic offer for a non-refundable vacation package to Hawaii. The offer expires tomorrow, but you won't know your exam results for another 2 days. What do you do? Now let's break this down with a bedrock principle of classical rationality, the sure thing principle. It's an axiom of logic that seems utterly unassailable. It states that if you would decide to do something given that a certain event occurs, and you would also decide to do the same thing, if that event does not times occur, then you should do it even when you don't know the outcome of the event. It makes perfect sense. So let's apply it. First, consider the scenario where you know you've passed the exam. Exuberant, you decide to reward yourself. You book the trip to Hawaii. Now consider the opposite. You know you've failed the exam. Devastated, you decide you need a consolation, a way to escape and regroup. You book the trip to Hawaii. According to the sure thing principle, since you would buy the ticket in either known outcome, you should absolutely buy the ticket when the outcome is unknown. It's the only logical choice. Yet when psychologists Amos Tversky and Eldar Shafir ran this very experiment, they discovered something that blew classical decision theory apart. The majority of students in the pass group chose to buy the ticket. A similar majority in the fail group also chose to buy the ticket. But in the group that did not know their result, the vast majority chose to wait. They paid a penalty to delay the decision until they knew the outcome. This is the disjunction effect, and it is a profound paradox. The presence of uncertainty paralyzed them, even though the resolution of that uncertainty in either direction would lead to the same action. They had a clear reason for going in both definite scenarios, to celebrate or to commiserate. But in the state of not knowing, those clear reasons seemed to vanish, leaving them suspended in a state of cognitive limbo. From a classical perspective, this is utterly irrational, a failure of logic. It's like a computer refusing to execute a command because it doesn't know the value of an irrelevant variable. But from a quantum perspective, it begins to make a strange, beautiful kind of sense. Think of the famous double-slit experiment. A single particle, when we know which of two slits it passes through, behaves like a simple projectile. It follows a definite path contributing to one of two distinct bands on a detector screen. The sum of the two individual outcomes is predictable. But when we don't know which slit it passes through, the particle behaves as if it passes through both at once, like a wave. It creates an interference pattern, a complex tapestry of light and dark bands that is fundamentally different from the simple sum of the two individual slit patterns. The uncertainty, the lack of which path information creates a new reality. The possibilities interfere with each other. Could our minds be doing the same thing? In the Hawaii experiment, the pass state and the fail state are like the two slits. When we know which state we are in, our path to a decision is clear. But when we exist in a superposition of both passing and failing, the reasons for our choice interfere. The positive feeling of celebration and the negative feeling of consolation might be like two waves out of phase, destructively interfering with one another. They cancel each other out, producing a new mental state paralysis, the desire to wait. The uncertainty itself doesn't just obscure the reasons, it actively dismantles them, creating a cognitive interference pattern that classical logic has no language to describe. Our rationality, it seems, is not a simple sum of its parts. It is a far more complex and holistic wave-like phenomenon, where possibilities can amplify, diminish, or even annihilate one another within the crucible of a single mind. These were not isolated quirks. Scientists began finding them everywhere in economics, in legal judgments, in social psychology. The classical model, so elegant and pure, was failing again and again to predict the beautiful, unruly patterns of human thought. It was becoming increasingly clear that a new framework was needed, a new mathematics of the mind. And this is where the story turns, from psychology to physics, from observing the mind's strange behavior to daring to write down the equations that might govern it. The first voices to propose a direct link were almost by necessity on the scientific fringe. They were thinkers like the physicist David Bohm, whose theories of implicate order suggested a deep, undivided wholeness connecting mind and matter. But the idea truly began to crystallize with a new generation of cognitive scientists and physicists in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Figures like Jerome Busemeyer, Peter Bruser, and Emmanuel Pothos. They were not mystics or philosophers trafficking in vague analogies. They were rigorous mathematicians and experimental psychologists. They looked at the mountains of data on cognitive biases and saw not flaws, but the precise mathematical signatures of quantum mechanics. Their proposal was both elegant and heretical. What if they asked the strange mathematics that governs the existence of a quark or a photon is the very same mathematics that governs a human belief or a decision under uncertainty? What if the abstract vector spaces of quantum theory, known as Hilbert spaces, were not just for describing the spin of an electron, but could also serve as the perfect mental space for mapping our thoughts. In this radical new vision, a mental state is not a simple on or off. It is a state vector, a direction in an abstract, multidimensional space of possibilities. Each choice we face, each question we ponder, acts as a new basis, a new coordinate system, forcing us to project our indefinite mental state onto a definite axis, yielding a concrete answer. The non-commutativity of questions, that's just a rotation of the coordinate system in this mental space. The disjunction effect, that's a textbook case of quantum interference between different basis states. Even violations of the law of total probability, another common bias, could be explained by the way quantum theory calculates probabilities. Classically, probabilities are always positive numbers that must sum to 1. But in quantum mechanics, you work with probability times amplitudes, times which can be positive or negative. You square them to get the final probability. This allows for destructive interference, where two potential pathways to an outcome can cancel each other out, making the outcome times less times likely than it would be otherwise. Suddenly, a whole host of irrational human behaviors seemed to find a natural, mathematically coherent explanation. This was not a mere metaphor. It was a hypothesis that the fundamental formalism of quantum theory, stripped of its specific physical context of particles and fields, provided a more accurate and powerful mathematical toolkit for modeling cognition than any classical particle system ever had. The idea was met with immense skepticism, and for good reason. The leap is staggering. It suggests that the operating principles of the subatomic world born in the silent, frigid vacuum of the quantum realm have somehow found a direct expression in the warm, wet, chaotic biology of the human brain. It proposes that the logic of our consciousness is not the logic of Aristotle, but the probabilistic, wave-like and profoundly interconnected logic of Heisenberg and Schrödinger. The pioneers of this field were accused of taking an analogy too far, of being mesmerized by the allure of quantum mystery, but they held their ground armed with the compelling symmetry between their models and the experimental data. They argued that science has often borrowed mathematical structures from one domain to explain another. Newton used the same laws of gravity to describe both a falling apple and a planet's orbit. Why should the mathematics of quantum probability be confined only to the quantum world if it so perfectly describes the behavior of the deciding mind? The evidence they compiled presented a formidable challenge to the classical view. It suggested that our internal world may not be a landscape of fixed and definite truths, but a shifting dynamic probability landscape where everything is potential until called upon. We do not simply have beliefs. We exist in a superposition of belief states. We do not merely make choices. We collapse the wave function of our own future. This reframes our entire understanding of what it means to think. Our perceived irrationality is not a flaw to be corrected, but perhaps a signature of a far more sophisticated and powerful form of information processing, one that embraces ambiguity and context dependence as fundamental features, not bugs. It paints a picture of a mind that is fluid, holistic, and deeply interconnected, where no thought or decision exists in isolation. But this stunning alignment between psychological data and quantum formalism leaves us teetering on the edge of an even deeper mystery. It answers the what, but screams the question, how? How could this possibly be? For this beautiful mathematical parallel to be more than a coincidence, for the brain to truly operate on quantum principles, it must possess a physical structure, a biological mechanism capable of initiating, sustaining, and harnessing these delicate quantum effects. It would need to shield them from the relentless noise of the classical world to create pockets of quantum coherence within the turbulent electrochemical storm of the brain. Finding such a mechanism is the holy grail of this field. It requires a journey from the abstract spaces of cognitive models down into the very molecular architecture of life itself. We must now leave the realm of observable human behavior and descend into the microscopic labyrinth of the neuron, searching for the physical evidence of a quantum mind. The search will take us to the very edge of neuroscience and biology, to controversial theories and breathtaking possibilities, as we ask the ultimate question, where inside our own heads is the quantum computer? And so, if the intricate tapestry of human thought cannot be woven on the loom of a classical machine, if our very sense of self defies the logic of bits and bytes, where then do we turn? The search for an answer demands a radical shift in perspective. A journey not outward into the cosmos, but deep inward past the familiar landscape of synapses and neurons, down into the subcellular country where the very architecture of life is forged. It is a descent into a realm so small, so fundamentally different from our own, that the rules of reality themselves begin to warp and bend. Here, in this hidden biological kingdom, we find the stage for one of the most audacious and controversial theories ever proposed about the nature of you. This is the world imagined by an unlikely pairing of minds, a practicing anesthesiologist from Arizona and one of the world's most revered mathematical physicists. Their collaboration began with a shared dissatisfaction, a mutual sense that the standard model of neuroscience, for all its power, had left the ghost in the machine utterly unexplained. Stuart Hameroff, working in operating rooms, witnessed the mysterious dance of consciousness firsthand. He saw it vanish with the administration of anesthetic gases and then miraculously reappear. He noted that these anesthetic molecules were not acting on the synaptic junctions between neurons, the supposed seat of all computation, but were instead targeting much smaller, more fundamental structures within the neurons themselves. This observation became an obsession, a clue that the secret of awareness was not in the electrical chatter between cells, but somewhere deeper within the cell's very skeleton. Across the Atlantic, the brilliant Sir Roger Penrose, a thinker who had walked beside Hawking in revolutionizing our understanding of black holes and the origins of the universe, arrived at the same precipice from an entirely different direction. Penrose, through pure mathematics and logic, had become convinced that human understanding possessed a non-computable quality. Our flashes of insight, our grasp of mathematical truth, our very comprehension of meaning, these, he argued, could not be replicated by any conceivable algorithm, no matter how complex. Some other process, something beyond classical physics, had to be at work. When these two intellectual currents, the biological and the mathematical, finally merged, they gave birth to a revolutionary hypothesis, a framework so bold it sought to unite the mysteries of the mind with the deepest enigmas of quantum physics. They called it orchestrated objective reduction, or Orch-OR. The theory proposes that our brains are not merely processing information, they are actively harnessing the bizarre and paradoxical laws of the quantum world to generate conscious experience itself. To understand their vision, you must first shrink your perspective. Imagine plunging into a single neuron, that magnificent cellular engine of thought. You bypass the sparking synapse and the electrically charged membrane, moving deeper into the neuron's cytoplasm. Here you find a world teeming with intricate machinery, a bustling metropolis of proteins and organelles. And crisscrossing this inner space, you discover an extraordinary network of crystalline filaments, a vast and elegant internal scaffolding. These are the microtubules. For decades, they were dismissed by many neuroscientists as little more than passive support beams, the biological equivalent of girders and struts responsible for maintaining the neuron's shape and transporting chemical packages along to its length. But Hameroff saw something more. He saw a structure of breathtaking complexity and order. Each microtubule is a hollow cylinder, a tube constructed from individual protein molecules called tubulin. Think of them as biological building blocks. 13 of these tubulin proteins arrange themselves into a ring, and these rings are then stacked one on top of the other like a roll of coins to form the microtubule's hollow cylinder. But the arrangement is even more exquisite than that. The stacked rings are slightly offset, creating a spiraling crystalline lattice on the microtubule's surface, a pattern that is both beautiful and crucially highly organized. This is not some random jumble of proteins. It is a paracrystalline structure, a biological crystal, with a repeating, almost geometric precision. Inside every single neuron in your brain, there are hundreds of thousands of these microtubules, forming a dense, interconnected web. This is the cytoskeleton, and according to Hameroff and Penrose, this is not just the skeleton of the cell. It is the central nervous system of the neuron, an information processing system of unimaginable power and density. The sheer numbers are staggering. Each tubulin protein is a component. A single neuron might contain 100 million of them. If the entire brain has 100 billion neurons, the total number of tubulin proteins becomes a figure that beggars belief: 10 quadrillion potential processing units. This is a computational substrate that dwarfs anything humanity has ever built. But raw numbers are not enough. The key to the Orch-OR theory lies in what these individual tubulin proteins might be doing. Hameroff proposed that each tubulin protein can act like a tiny molecular switch, flipping between at least two different physical shapes or conformations. This is a classical idea akin to a binary switch being either on or off, a 1 or a 0. But this is where Penrose's quantum intuition entered the picture, transforming the theory from a complex biological model into a truly mind-bending proposition. What if he asked the tubulin protein wasn't just flipping between state A and state B? What if, like a quantum particle, it could exist in both states at the very same time? This is the foundational principle of quantum superposition. In the quantum realm, an electron is not just a tiny spinning ball. It can spin both clockwise and counterclockwise simultaneously until it is measured. An atom is not in one location. It exists as a cloud of probability, a wave of potential that spreads across multiple locations at once. Penrose and Hameroff suggested that each tubulin protein within the microtubule lattice could leverage this quantum weirdness. Instead of being a simple classical bit, each tubulin could become a quantum bit or qubit. It could enter a ghostly state of superposition, a delicate, shimmering existence where it is simultaneously in both of its possible shapes. This single idea changes everything. A classical computer built with 10 quadrillion bits could hold an enormous amount of information. But a quantum computer with 10 quadrillion qubits could hold an amount of information that is exponentially, unimaginably larger. It could explore a vast landscape of possibilities all at once in a single, silent, parallel computation. If the brain were indeed doing this, it would possess a processing power that makes the world's supercomputers look like simple abacuses. But an even more profound quantum phenomenon was needed to knit these individual qubits together into a coherent whole. A collection of isolated, shimmering tubulins would be just quantum noise. To create thought, you need connection, you need order, you need an orchestra. This is where the second pillar of quantum mechanics enters the story: entanglement. When two or more quantum particles become entangled, they are no longer separate entities. They become a single unified system linked by what Einstein famously called spooky action at a distance. Whatever happens to one particle instantaneously affects the other, no matter how far apart they are. There is no signal sent between them. Their fates are intrinsically, mysteriously intertwined. In the Orch-OR model, the tubulin qubits within a microtubule do not exist in isolation. Through subtle quantum interactions, they can become entangled with their neighbors. One entangled tubulin recruits another and another and another. This entanglement can spread like a wave through the microtubule and potentially even leap from one microtubule to another and from one neuron to the next through proposed quantum channels called gap junctions. Suddenly, you don't just have individual proteins in a state of superposition. You have a vast interconnected web of entangled qubits, a single gigantic quantum state spread across a significant portion of the brain. This is the orchestrated part of the theory. The classical cellular processes, the firing of synapses and the flow of ions, are not the creators of consciousness. Instead, they are the conductors of this quantum symphony. They are the musicians who orchestrate the quantum computation, tuning the system, selecting which tubulins enter superposition, and guiding the spread of entanglement. The brain's familiar electrical activity acts as the control layer for a much deeper, much faster, and much more powerful form of quantum computation happening within the very fabric of the neurons themselves. This vision is breathtaking. It paints a picture of your mind as a ghostly fog of potential, a superposition of countless different thoughts, memories, and perceptions all existing at once, all entangled in a silent, coherent quantum dance. But this raises a critical question. If your brain is in a constant state of quantum superposition, Why don't you experience the world as a blurry probabilistic haze? Why do you experience a single definite classical reality? Why does the fog of possibility collapse into a single crisp conscious moment? This is the problem of measurement in quantum mechanics, the greatest puzzle in all of science, and it is here that Roger Penrose introduced his most radical and universe-altering idea, objective reduction. For nearly a century, the standard interpretation of quantum mechanics has held that a quantum superposition only collapses when it is measured or observed by a conscious entity. This is a deeply unsettling idea, suggesting that reality itself is somehow dependent on our looking at it. Penrose found this unacceptable. He proposed that consciousness doesn't cause the collapse. Consciousness times the collapse. He argued that the collapse of the quantum wave function is a real physical process, one that happens automatically, objectively, without any need for an observer. He called this objective reduction, or OR, and he gave it a cause rooted in the very nature of space-time itself. According to Einstein's general relativity mass and energy curve, the fabric of space-time and this curvature is what we experience as gravity. Now consider a single tubulin protein in a superposition of two different shapes. In one shape, its mass is distributed in a certain way. In its other shape, the mass is distributed slightly differently. When the tubulin is in superposition, it is in a sense in two places at once. This means, according to Penrose, that it creates two different superimposed curvatures in the geometry of space-time. You have a tiny, fleeting blister on the fabric of reality, a microscopic separation of the universe from itself. The two versions of space-time are out of sync. Penrose argued that the universe does not tolerate this separation. This schism in space-time creates a kind of gravitational self-energy, an instability that grows over time. The more mass is involved in the superposition, the more tubulins that are entangled together, the more unstable this space-time blister becomes. Eventually, it reaches a critical threshold, a point of no return. At that moment, nature is forced to make a choice. The superposition cannot be sustained any longer. It collapses spontaneously, objectively, into one of the two possible states. The space-time blister resolves, and a single, classical reality is selected. This, for Penrose and Hameroff, is the physical mechanism of a moment of conscious experience. Every time this objective reduction occurs, a moment of now is born. A proto-conscious event, as they call it, flashes into existence. It is a discrete, indivisible event, a single frame in the movie of your awareness. The quantum computation, the vast exploration of possibilities happening in the superposition of entangled tubulins, reaches its gravitationally induced threshold, and times, it collapses into a definite choice. A decision is made. A face is recognized, a feeling is felt, an idea is understood. This is not a computation in the classical sense of following an algorithm. It is a selection of one reality from a menu of quantum possibilities, a selection guided by the fundamental structure of the universe itself. Our continuous stream of consciousness in this view is a sequence of these discrete collapse events, a cascade of quantum reductions happening again and again, orchestrated by the brain's classical activity. According to their calculations, these moments might happen at a frequency of around 40 times per second, a rate that corresponds remarkably well with the well-known gamma synchrony brainwaves, which many neuroscientists already believe are a neural correlate of consciousness. It's as if your brain is a quantum orchestra playing a symphony of space-time collapses. The period of superposition is the gathering of tension, the exploration of musical themes and possibilities, all held in a shimmering quantum state. The moment of objective reduction is the chord being struck, the resolution, the birth of a definite felt experience. This is the orchestrated objective reduction theory in its full majestic scope. It is a stunning intellectual edifice, an attempt to build a bridge across the gaping chasm that separates the physical world from the world of subjective experience. It proposes that consciousness is not an emergent property of complex computation, but rather a fundamental feature of the universe, woven into the very geometry of space-time. Each conscious moment is an instance where the universe becomes aware of itself. a choice point where the quantum potential of reality collapses into the classical actuality of experience. It suggests that your mind is connected to reality at a level far deeper than we have ever dared to imagine, that you are not just a passenger in the universe, but an active participant in its continuous creation. The theory is both exhilarating and for many deeply unsettling. It places the human mind at the nexus of biology, physics, and cosmology, suggesting the processes occurring within your skull are echoes of the fundamental laws that govern the cosmos. It is a grand and beautiful vision, but is it true? Does this almost impossibly delicate quantum symphony truly play out within the warm, wet, and chaotic environment of a living brain? Science does not progress on beauty alone. A theory as revolutionary as Orch-OR must face the crucible of scientific scrutiny, and its critics have lined up with formidable and deeply challenging questions. The journey into the microtubule has provided us with a potential stage for quantum consciousness, but now we must confront the harsh realities of the biological world and ask the most difficult question of all: could such a fragile quantum process possibly survive in the brain long enough to matter? It is a staggering, beautiful idea. An elegant architecture where the very soul of consciousness is woven from the fundamental threads of the universe, orchestrated within the protein palaces of our own neurons. For many, this exquisite picture, this grand unified theory of mind and matter, is precisely the problem. Because as we descend from the pristine theoretical peaks of quantum mechanics and Platonic mathematics, we crash into the brutal, unforgiving reality of biology. The dream of a quantum mind so carefully constructed now faces a gauntlet of skepticism, a trial by fire from which most new ideas in science never return. This is the downward path where the sheer audacity of the proposal meets the immovable object of established physics and neuroscience. The journey into doubt begins with a single devastating word: decoherence. It is the great enemy of the quantum world, the universal tax levied by reality on any system that dares to exist in two states at once. It is the subtle, incessant whisper of the classical universe that shatters the quantum dream. To understand its power, imagine striking a perfect tuning fork in the absolute vacuum of deep space. Its pure tone, its coherent vibration, would ring out for an immense period, a single unwavering note in the cosmic silence. This is coherence, a state of pristine, isolated quantum purity. Now take that same ringing tuning fork and plunge it into a bustling, chaotic marketplace. It is jostled by the crowd, its vibrations are dampened by the thick, humid air, and its singular note is instantly drowned out by a cacophony of shouting voices, rumbling carts, and clanging bells. Within a fraction of a second, its perfect, coherent vibration is gone, dissipated into the random noise of its environment. It has decohered. The brain you see is not the silent vacuum of space. It is the marketplace. It is a biological furnace operating at a warm 37 degrees Celsius. It is a wet, sloshing environment, an electrochemical soup teeming with charged ions, polar water molecules, and countless other biomolecules, all locked in a frenetic, chaotic dance. Each of these particles is a potential saboteur of the quantum state. Every random thermal vibration that jostles a microtubule, every rogue water molecule that collides with a tubulin protein, every flicker of an electric field from a nearby firing neuron, each of an almost infinite number of tiny interactions, acts like a measurement. It is the universe constantly peeking at the quantum state, asking, "Are you here or are you there?" The very act of this environmental observation forces the superposition to collapse, to choose a single, definite state. The magic vanishes, the quantum computation aborts before it can even truly begin, and the tubulin dimer snaps back into the mundane classical world. The central terrifying question for Orch-OR is not times if times this happens, but times how fast asterisk. The answer, according to many physicists, was delivered like a death blow. In the mid-1990 seconds, physicist Max Tegmark performed a series of calculations that have haunted the theory ever since. He sought to determine the timescale for decoherence within microtubules, taking into account the known temperature and density of the brain's interior. His results were not just bad, they were catastrophic. Tegmark calculated that any quantum superposition in a tubulin protein would be destroyed by its chaotic environment in approximately 100 femtoseconds. A femtosecond is a millionth of a billionth of a second. It is a timescale so incomprehensibly brief that in the time it takes you to blink, trillions of these decoherence events would have occurred. To put this into perspective, the timescale Hameroff and Penrose proposed for their conscious moments, the objective reduction is around 25 milliseconds. That is hundreds of trillions of times longer than Tegmark's calculated coherence lifetime. The implication was brutal and unambiguous. It suggested that the brain was not just a noisy environment for quantum effects, it was a quantum computation slaughterhouse. The delicate superpositions required for Orch-OR wouldn't even last long enough to influence a single amino acid, let alone orchestrate the firing of an entire neuron or weave together the fabric of a subjective experience. It was from this perspective like trying to build a delicate ice sculpture with a blowtorch. The very medium was hostile to the structure. The mathematics seemed to serve as an executioner, severing the link between the quantum world and the thinking brain before it could ever be forged. For the majority of the scientific community, this was the end of the discussion. The theory was not merely speculative, it was physically impossible, a beautiful hypothesis slain by a terrible fact. Of course, the proponents of Orch-OR did not simply surrender to this apparent checkmate. Stuart Hameroff in particular has argued for decades that Tegmark's calculations made a critical error. They treated the inside of the microtubule as the same chaotic soup as the rest of the neuron. Hameroff contends that the microtubule is not a leaky vessel, but a highly specialized, almost crystalline structure, a natural quantum sanctuary carved out of the cellular chaos. He and his collaborators have proposed a series of biological mechanisms that might act as a shield, a protective cocoon to fend off the storm of decoherence. They point to the possibility of ordered water lining the interior of the microtubule, forming a gel-like layer that could insulate the tubulin proteins from thermal vibrations. Imagine a layer of acoustic foam lining the walls of a concert hall, absorbing stray noise so that the pure music can be heard. Perhaps biology evolved a similar solution. Furthermore, they argue the entire cytoskeleton, the vast interconnected network of filaments and tubes within the cell, might act as a kind of biological Faraday cage, isolating the microtubules from electrical noise. They even suggest that the cell might use metabolic energy, the very currency of life, ATP, to actively pump out decoherence like a bilge pump furiously working to keep a ship afloat in a storm. These are ingenious and desperate defenses, attempts to find a loophole in the laws of thermodynamics and classical biology. They paint a picture of the neuron as a far more subtle and sophisticated environment than previously imagined, one that might have evolved the precise, extraordinary biophysics needed to protect these fleeting quantum states. But for critics, these explanations raise more questions than they answer. Each proposed shield, each biological loophole is itself a complex, unproven hypothesis layered on top of the original, already controversial one. It begins to look less like a scientific theory and more like a fortress of what-ifs, each one built to defend the last. Even if against all odds, the decoherence problem could be solved if microtubules were indeed perfect quantum isolation chambers, Orch-OR would immediately face a second, equally formidable challenge, this one from the world of mainstream neuroscience. The question here is one of scale and relevance. For over 70 years, neuroscience has been building a remarkably successful model of the brain based on entirely classical principles. This is the story of neurons as complex biological information processors of electrochemical signals and synaptic connections. At the heart of this model is the neurons firing the action potential. We understand this process in exquisite detail. It's a cascade of events. Chemical messengers called neurotransmitters bind to receptors, opening tiny gates on the cell membrane. Charged ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, flood in or out, changing the electrical voltage across the membrane. When this voltage reaches a critical threshold, an all-or-nothing electrical spike, the action potential is triggered and propagates down the axon to communicate with the next neuron. It is a stunningly intricate and powerful system, a symphony of chemistry and electricity that can account for learning, memory, perception, and action. The classical model, epitomized by the work of Hodgkin and Huxley, is not just a rough sketch. It is a predictive quantitative theory that has been the bedrock of modern neuroscience. It explains how anesthetics work by interfering with these very ion channels and synaptic processes. It explains how our brains compute by integrating thousands of incoming signals and deciding whether the cumulative voltage is sufficient to pass that threshold and fire. It is by all accounts a triumph of scientific explanation, and into this beautifully articulated classical machine, Orch-OR, inserts a quantum ghost. The theory posits that the conscious decision, the aha moment of objective reduction, is what ultimately triggers the neuron to fire. The quantum computation within the microtubules is supposed to be the puppet master pulling the strings of the entire classical electrochemical apparatus. To a neuroscientist, this seems like a solution in search of a problem. They would ask, where is the gap in our understanding that requires such an extraordinary explanation? The classical model already provides a perfectly good mechanism for determining when a neuron fires the summation of its inputs. To suggest that a quantum event in the cytoskeleton is the true cause is to many a violation of Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation is usually the right one. Why invoke the arcane and unproven world of quantum gravity to explain an event that seems to be fully accounted for by well-understood biology? It feels like suggesting that the true reason a clock's hands move is not because of its gears and springs, but because of invisible fairies, guiding them even when we can see the gears and springs working perfectly. The problem of scale becomes even more acute when you consider the sheer complexity of thought. A single conscious experience recognizing a face, understanding a sentence, feeling a pang of nostalgia involves the coordinated activity of millions, if not billions, of neurons across multiple brain regions. If each neuron's firing is determined by a quantum computation, how are these countless individual quantum events synchronized across vast distances in the brain? How does the objective reduction in a neuron in your visual cortex coordinate with one in your auditory cortex to produce a unified perception of a person speaking to you? Orch-OR offers no clear mechanism for this large-scale integration, this binding of disparate quantum events into a single coherent stream of consciousness. The classical model, however, does. It speaks of neural synchrony of brain waves and oscillating networks that bind populations of neurons together. Once again, the established classical explanation seems more robust, more complete, and vastly more plausible. Finally, we arrive at the third great wall of skepticism, the evolutionary argument. Nature, through the relentless process of natural selection, is a ruthless pragmatist. It does not build elaborate, fragile, and energy-intensive systems when a simpler, more robust one will do the job. The classical neuron is a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. It's resilient. It can function across a range of temperatures and metabolic conditions. It is noisy, yes, but it has evolved sophisticated mechanisms to extract clear signals from that noise. It is, in short, a system perfectly adapted to the messy reality of the biological world. A quantum computer, by contrast, is the most delicate instrument humanity has ever conceived. Building one requires near absolute zero temperatures, extreme vacuums, and massive magnetic shielding to fend off the ever-present threat of decoherence. The evolutionary question, then, is a stark one. Is it plausible that over millions of years, evolution would stumble upon and then perfect a computational system that is exquisitely, almost suicidally sensitive to the very environment it must inhabit? Why would it develop this delicate crystal palace of quantum computation to perform tasks that a robust brick fortress of classical computation seems to handle so well? The metabolic cost alone would be staggering. Maintaining the proposed quantum coherence, actively pumping out the environmental noise, would require a colossal amount of cellular energy, potentially making the brain an even more power-hungry organ than it already is. From a purely biological and evolutionary standpoint, the quantum brain appears to be a terrible design choice, a high-risk, high-cost gamble when a reliable, low-cost alternative was already available. This trifecta of challenges, the seemingly insurmountable physics of decoherence, the sufficiency of classical neuroscience, and the stark improbability of its evolution, has relegated Orch-OR and similar theories to the far fringes of accepted science. For the vast majority of physicists and neurobiologists, the case is closed. The quantum brain is a captivating romantic notion, a testament to the human desire to connect our own mysterious consciousness with the deepest mysteries of the cosmos. But in the cold, hard light of day, it remains a fringe hypothesis, a ghost story told around the campfire of science, haunted by the lack of direct, verifiable experimental evidence. After decades of speculation and debate, not a single experiment has definitively shown that microtubules can sustain quantum coherence for the required time, let alone that this coherence has anything to do with consciousness. It remains a theory built on a tantalizing but unproven foundation, a grand cathedral of an idea standing on pillars of sand. So, is this the end of the road? Is the quest for the quantum origins of the mind a noble but failed experiment, a dead end in the labyrinth of neuroscience? Is consciousness destined to be explained solely by the intricate, but ultimately classical dance of atoms and electricity? For many, the answer is a resounding yes. The challenges are too great, the evidence too thin, the classical alternatives too powerful. Yet science is a story of overturned assumptions. The history of discovery is littered with theories that were once dismissed as heretical, but later returned to revolutionize our understanding. Perhaps the critics, in their focus on the warm, wet brain of a mammal, have missed something fundamental. Perhaps the first clues to a true quantum biology are not to be found in the complexities of human consciousness, but hiding in plain sight in far simpler organisms. What if nature has been harnessing the strange rules of the quantum world all along in ways we are only just beginning to comprehend? To find the next piece of this puzzle, we must leave the human brain behind and look to the humblest of life forms to see if the ghost of quantum mechanics truly walks. The sunlit world of biology. For decades, the verdict seemed absolute, a judgment handed down from the high court of classical physics. The brain, we were told, was simply the wrong kind of place for the delicate ghost of quantum mechanics. It was a warm, wet, chaotic environment, an electrochemical storm, where any fragile quantum state, any whisper of superposition or entanglement, would be shouted down by thermal noise in less than a femtosecond. This process, known as decoherence, was the insurmountable wall, the final word on the matter. The quantum dream, as applied to the mind, was dismissed as a beautiful but naive fantasy, a misapplication of physics to a domain where it simply did not belong. And yet, a revolution was quietly brewing in an entirely different corner of the biological sciences. It began not with the grand mystery of consciousness, but with a question far more humble. How does a leaf, in the dappled sunlight of a forest floor, capture energy with such breathtaking efficiency? For a long time, the answer seemed simple enough. A photon of light strikes a chlorophyll molecule, exciting an electron, which then hops from molecule to molecule in a kind of random, drunken walk, until it eventually stumbles into the reaction center, where its energy can be stored. This classical picture worked, but it was clunky, inefficient, and wasteful. Nature, however, is rarely clunky. It is the ultimate optimizer. The truth, when it was finally glimpsed, was infinitely more elegant and far more strange. Scientists discovered that when that photon strikes, it doesn't just create one excited electron on a single path. Instead, it creates a wave of possibility, an excitation known as an exciton, that exists in a state of quantum superposition. It doesn't hop, it doesn't choose one path. It simultaneously explores every single possible pathway all at once through the dense molecular forest of the photosynthetic complex. This is not a metaphor. The energy exists as a distributed, coherent wave, instantly, feeling out the entire network to find the route of least resistance. It is a living quantum search algorithm running in the heart of a plant cell, outperforming any classical random walk by orders of magnitude. Suddenly, the warm, wet, and noisy objection began to look less like an ironclad law and more like a failure of imagination. Here was a biological system bathed in sunlight, drenched in water, not just tolerating quantum effects but actively harnessing them for its survival. Photosynthesis wasn't an accident. It was an evolutionary masterpiece of quantum engineering. Life, it turned out, hadn't been scared off by quantum weirdness. It had embraced it, tamed it, and woven it into the very fabric of its most fundamental processes. We had been looking for a fragile glass sculpture, expecting it to shatter at the slightest touch. But nature had built a quantum machine out of resilient, self-repairing biological materials. This revelation was a seismic shock, sending tremors through the foundations of biology. If a humble plant could operate a nanoscale supercomputer to find the fastest path for energy, what other quantum secrets might be hiding in plain sight? The answer would come not from the forest floor, but from the boundless skies. Consider the European robin, a tiny creature embarking on an epic migratory journey spanning thousands of miles. For years, its ability to navigate with pinpoint accuracy was a profound mystery. It doesn't just follow coastlines or rely on the sun's position, especially on overcast days or during night flights. It possesses an internal compass, an unerring sense of the Earth's magnetic field, a field so weak it's 100 times less powerful than a common refrigerator magnet. How could a biological system possibly detect such a faint, featureless signal? No classical mechanism seemed plausible. There is no chunk of iron in a bird's brain, no spinning needle to point north. The organ of perception, if it existed, was invisible. The leading theory today, supported by a growing mountain of experimental evidence, is so radical it sounds like science fiction. It is called the radical pair mechanism. The process is thought to begin inside the bird's retina. When a photon of light strikes a specific molecule, it knocks an electron loose, sending it to a nearby partner molecule and creating two molecules, each with an unpaired electron. This is the radical pair. These two electrons, though now physically separated on different molecules, are born from the same event and can be quantumly entangled, their fates intertwined in a ghostly link. Their quantum property of spin is correlated. They form a single unified system. This delicate entangled state is exquisitely sensitive to external magnetic fields. The Earth's magnetic field, as weak as it is, exerts a tiny torque on the electron spins, influencing how long they remain in their entangled state. This, in turn, subtly changes the chemical reaction rates of the molecules they inhabit. The bird's brain, through an evolutionary miracle, has learned to interpret these subtle chemical shifts as a visual pattern superimposed on its normal field of vision. It literally sees the Earth's magnetic field as a pattern of light and shadow, a heads-up display for global navigation. What you are witnessing is a biological sensor forged from quantum entanglement. The bird is not just in the world. A quantum connection links its very biochemistry to the planet's magnetic heart. It is a walking, flying, living quantum device, operating perfectly within its own warm, wet and noisy body. The implications of these discoveries of quantum photosynthesis and avian magnetoreception are monumental. They shatter the old paradigm. They prove beyond any reasonable doubt that nature has not only solved the decoherence problem, but has turned it into an opportunity, evolving sophisticated molecular architectures that actively protect and exploit quantum phenomena. The argument that biology is too messy for quantum mechanics is revealed for what it is, a prejudice. An assumption that life must play by our intuitive classical rules. But life is cleverer than that, and so we must turn our gaze back to the most complex biological system we know, the human brain. The question is no longer, can time's life use quantum mechanics? The question we are now forced to confront is times. Does the human brain do it too? Times. If a plant can use superposition to harvest light, and a bird can use entanglement to navigate the globe, could the 3-pound universe inside our skulls be using these same principles for an even more extraordinary task? Could it be harnessing the quantum world to generate thought, to create consciousness itself? The old wall of decoherence, once thought to be insurmountable, now appears to be porous. And a new generation of scientists is daring to ask how might the brain protect its own quantum secrets. The architects of the Orch-OR theory, Penrose and Hameroff, had placed their bet on the microtubules, the hollow crystalline cylinders that form the cytoskeleton of our neurons. They proposed these structures could act as quantum resonators, isolated from the noisy cellular environment. But how? The search for a plausible biological mechanism for shielding these quantum states has become a new frontier. One of the most promising ideas centers on the very substance that makes the brain so wet water. For a long time, the water inside our cells was thought to be just a chaotic soup, indistinguishable from the water in a glass. But new research suggests that water molecules surrounding proteins like tubulin can organize themselves into ordered gel-like layers. This ordered water might act as a natural Faraday cage, a biological insulator that shields the microtubules from the electrical and thermal noise of the cell. Like the silent padded walls of a recording studio, this structured water could create zones of quantum quiet pockets of calm amidst the cellular storm where the delicate symphony of quantum computation could unfold undisturbed. Furthermore, the very structure of the tubulin proteins themselves may play a role. They contain pockets of non-polar amino acids, regions that naturally repel the charged, noisy parts of other molecules. These pockets are filled with pi orbital electron clouds, which are known to be conducive to quantum effects. It's been proposed that these regions could act as tiny sanctuaries, sub-nanoscale chambers, where quantum states can be initiated and maintained. The microtubule, then, is not just a simple scaffold. It might be a cleverly designed quantum apparatus, a gravitational gyroscope, as some have imagined using ordered water and specific molecular geometry to create the perfect conditions for coherence. Evolutionary pressure, the same force that perfected photosynthesis over 1 billion years, could have spent hundreds of millions of years refining the brain's ability to protect these states, selecting for neural architectures that could shield and sustain quantum computations because they conferred a survival advantage, faster problem-solving, more nuanced understanding, perhaps even the spark of subjective awareness itself. The brain might not be fighting decoherence, it may have evolved to master it. This is a breathtaking theoretical landscape filled with elegant solutions and profound possibilities. But theories, no matter how beautiful, remain speculation until they can be tested. For quantum cognition to move from the fringes to the mainstream, it needs more than just compelling arguments. It needs evidence. It needs a signal from the noise. It needs the discovery of a quantum signature, an observable, measurable effect in the brain that can only be explained by the strange rules of quantum mechanics. The hunt for this signature is now one of the most exciting and challenging quests in all of science. It is a search for the ghost in the machine, but with instruments of exquisite precision. How would you even begin to look for such a thing? You can't simply crack open a neuron and expect to see a superposition. The very act of observing a quantum state destroys it. The approach, therefore, must be indirect, clever, and subtle. It involves looking for the times of quantum processing on a larger classical scale that we can times measure, like behavior, reaction times, or the patterns of electrical activity picked up by an EEG. The strategy is one of disruption. If there are quantum computations happening in the brain, they must be fragile. So what if we could find a way to gently knock them, to increase their rate of decoherence, and then observe if that disruption has a specific effect on cognitive function? One of the most audacious experiments currently being pursued involves a surprising tool: general anesthetics. We know that certain anesthetic gases can switch off consciousness with remarkable specificity while leaving most other brain functions intact. The mystery is how they work. They don't seem to operate on any single known classical pathway. Stuart Hameroff has proposed that their true target is the quantum activity within microtubules. He argues that these anesthetic molecules, because of their quantum properties, are perfectly shaped to get into those non-polar pockets within the tubulin proteins and disrupt the delicate electron cloud dynamics required for consciousness. They don't shut the brain down, they just force its quantum computations to decohere. This leads to a stunningly elegant experimental prediction. Consider the element xenon, a potent anesthetic. It comes in different forms or isotopes with slightly different numbers of neutrons in their nucleus. Most of these isotopes have a nuclear spin of 0, but some, like xenon 129, have a non-zero nuclear spin which creates a tiny magnetic moment. From a classical chemical perspective, these isotopes are identical. They should behave the same way in the brain. But from a quantum perspective, that tiny nuclear spin makes a world of difference. It should be far more disruptive to any delicate spin-based quantum computations. The prediction is therefore crystal clear. Xenon 129 should be a more potent anesthetic than the isotopes without nuclear spin. If you can alter the state of consciousness simply by changing a quantum number in the nucleus of an anesthetic atom while leaving all its classical chemistry untouched, you have found a smoking gun. You have found a direct link between a purely quantum property and the highest level of cognitive function. These experiments are incredibly difficult, but they are underway, pushing the limits of our technology. Another avenue of attack involves the use of precisely tuned magnetic fields. Just as the Earth's magnetic field can influence the entangled electrons in a bird's eye, perhaps an externally applied magnetic field could subtly interfere with quantum processes in the human brain. Researchers are exploring whether transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, can be used not just to stimulate or inhibit brain regions in a classical sense, but to specifically disrupt hypothetical quantum states. By varying the frequency and orientation of the magnetic fields, they hope to find a resonant frequency that preferentially knocks out quantum coherence, leading to measurable changes in complex cognitive tasks like creative, problem-solving or intuitive leaps tasks that classical computers find so difficult. The search is also on for biochemical markers. For instance, certain lithium isotopes are known to have different quantum properties. It has been observed for decades that lithium has powerful effects on mood and cognition, but the precise mechanism remains elusive. Could it be that one lithium isotope is more effective because its quantum spin properties interact more profoundly with the brain's computational machinery? Researchers are now re-examining these old questions through a new quantum lens. We find ourselves then at a precipice. The old certainties have crumbled, swept away by the undeniable reality of quantum biology. The once heretical idea that the warm, wet brain could host the universe's most subtle physical phenomena no longer seems impossible, but perhaps inevitable. We have a plausible location in the microtubules, a set of plausible shielding mechanisms, and a portfolio of brilliant, daring experiments designed to finally put the theory to the ultimate test. For the first time in this long and controversial debate, we are moving beyond pure philosophy and theoretical physics. We are building the tools to ask the question directly of the brain itself. We are constructing the experiments that will listen for a whisper of quantum coherence beneath the roar of classical neurobiology. The search for a quantum signature is not just another scientific endeavor. It is a quest to understand the very nature of our own existence, to discover if the richness of our inner world, our capacity for insight, creativity, and conscious experience emerges from the mundane firing of neurons or from a deeper, stranger, and more profound reality. We stand at the threshold waiting for a signal from the quantum ghost within the machine. The only question that remains is, will we be able to hear it when it finally answers? And so our journey ends here, at the shimmering edge of an intellectual abyss, a place where the familiar landscape of the mind gives way to a terrain governed by the most counterintuitive laws in the known universe. We have walked the hallowed halls of classical neuroscience, marveling at the intricate clockwork of the brain, a 3-pound universe of neurons firing in a magnificent, predictable symphony. We celebrated this biological engine, this astonishingly complex machine that learns, remembers, and computes our reality with relentless logical precision. For centuries, this model has been our rock, our foundation for understanding who we are. It gave us a brain of circuits and signals, a mind that was in essence a sophisticated program running on organic hardware. Yet throughout our exploration, we felt the persistent pull of a deeper mystery, a ghost in that beautiful machine that the classical view could not fully exorcise. We confronted the hard problem of consciousness, that stubborn, inexplicable chasm between the physical processing of information and the raw subjective feeling of experience itself. How does a cascade of electrochemical reactions become the breathtaking crimson of a sunset, the piercing sorrow of a lost love, or the ineffable joy of a melody? The clockwork brain, for all its explanatory power, falls silent before this. Question. It can describe the mechanics of perception, but cannot account for the perceiver. It can map the pathways of thought, but cannot explain the thinker who walks them. It was in this profound silence that we dared to listen for a different kind of sound, a whisper from a deeper level of reality. We descended past the neuron, past the synapse, into the subatomic architecture of the mind itself, seeking answers in the bewildering world of the quantum. We stood alongside pioneers like Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, who invited us to see the brain not as a digital computer, but as a quantum orchestra. They guided us into the hollow crystalline proteins of the microtubule cytoskeleton, proposing these intricate structures as the biological sanctuaries where the soul of quantum mechanics superposition could be preserved. Here, protected from the noisy classical world, qubits of information could exist not as simple on or off switches, but as shimmering clouds of infinite potential. We grappled with the implications of this radical idea, the notion that your every thought, your every fleeting feeling might begin its life as a delicate quantum state, a superposition of countless possibilities existing all at once. We envisioned memories not as data stored in specific locations, but as entangled patterns woven into the very fabric of space-time geometry within the brain. This was a breathtaking leap, a vision of the mind not merely processing reality, but resonating with its fundamental quantum nature. It suggested that the building blocks of our consciousness are not bits of information, but waves of probability collapsing into the sharp, definite reality of a single experience, only at the moment of conscious awareness. The challenges we discovered are monumental. The brain is a warm, wet, and chaotic environment, seemingly the worst possible place for the fragile flower of quantum coherence to bloom. Decoherence, the relentless intrusion of the classical world, stands as a formidable guardian at the gate, threatening to dissolve any quantum state in an instant. The experimental evidence remains elusive, a collection of tantalizing clues and suggestive anomalies, rather than a definitive smoking gun. The skeptic's arguments are powerful and grounded in a deep understanding of both biology and physics. They caution us against seeing quantum magic where there may only be complex but ultimately classical biology at play. And yet, the quantum hypothesis refuses to be dismissed. It persists, haunting the edges of our understanding because it offers something that no classical model has yet been able to provide: a potential bridge across the explanatory gap. It offers a new language, a new set of physical principles with which to describe the inner world. Suddenly, the seemingly intractable problems of consciousness take on a different shape. The binding problem, for instance, how your brain seamlessly integrates sights, sounds, and sensations from different regions into a single, unified moment of perception, finds a natural analogue in quantum entanglement. Could it be that the disparate neural activities representing the colour, shape, and scent of a rose are bound together not by classical signalling, but by a shared non-local quantum state, an indivisible wholeness that exists outside of conventional space and time? This is not merely a new way of thinking about the brain's wiring diagram. It is a revolution in how we conceive of conscious unity. A unified conscious moment might not be an emergent property of complex computation, but rather a fundamental feature of a large-scale entangled quantum state. Your sense of being a single, coherent self experiencing one continuous reality could be a direct manifestation of quantum wholeness. In this view, you are not a collection of parts cleverly stitched together. You are, at your core, a quantum monolith. The feeling of unity is real, because at some deep level the physical substrate of your consciousness is truly indivisibly one. Consider again the raw texture of experience, the qualia that so confound classical science. Why does the frequency of a light wave feel like red? A classical computer, no matter how powerful, only manipulates symbols. It can process the number representing red, trigger an output, even label the experience with the word red. But it never actually times the redness. A quantum explanation, however, opens a new, albeit speculative, door. If conscious moments are tied to the collapse of a quantum wave function, as the Orch-OR theory suggests, then perhaps qualia are the intrinsic elemental properties of that physical event. Perhaps the redness of red is not a representation or a symbol, but the fundamental physical nature of a specific type of orchestrated objective reduction occurring in your brain. In this paradigm, your subjective experience is no longer an epiphenomenon, a ghost haunting the cerebral machinery. It becomes an integral part of the physical universe, as fundamental as mass or spin. Your consciousness is not something the brain times produces, times like a factory producing smoke. It is something the universe times does times through the unique biological instrument of your brain. This would mean that the vibrant, subjective reality you inhabit is not an illusion painted by your neurons. It is a genuine window into a deeper quantum physical layer of existence, a layer where information and experience are inextricably fused. We are not just seeing the universe, we are experiencing the universe's own quantum states through the apparatus of our minds. And what of free will? This ancient philosophical battleground is completely redefined by the quantum question. In the deterministic clockwork universe of Newton, every effect has a cause. Every decision you make is the inevitable result of a chain of events stretching back to the Big Bang. Your feeling of choice is a grand illusion, the product of a system so complex you cannot predict its outcome, but an outcome that was nevertheless written in stone from the beginning. In this world, you are a passenger observing a story that has already been told. There is no room for a true author of your actions. Quantum mechanics, with its inherent indeterminacy, shatters this clockwork prison. At the subatomic level, the universe is not deterministic, it is probabilistic. A particle's future is a spectrum of possibilities, until a measurement forces it to choose one state. If our decision-making processes are influenced by these quantum events, as a quantum cognition model would suggest, then the future is no longer a fixed line, it is a branching tree of probabilities. The moment of choice could be the moment of quantum collapse, the point at which potential becomes actual. This doesn't automatically grant us free will in the way we intuitively feel it, it could just be randomness injected into a machine. Is a choice dictated by a random quantum fluctuation any more free than one dictated by a deterministic chain of cause and effect? Perhaps the answer may lie in the nuanced interaction between the quantum and classical layers of the brain. The quantum processes might not be the choice itself, but the act of generating novel possibilities, of creating genuine new options that were not predetermined. The conscious classical mind could then select from this quantum-generated menu of potentials. In this hybrid model, you are neither a puppet of determinism nor a slave to randomness. You are a collaborator with the quantum universe. Your brain becomes a true creation engine, harnessing the fundamental creativity of the cosmos to generate possibilities, allowing your conscious self to navigate an open future. The feeling of freedom you have right now, the sense that you could choose to think of 1,000 different things in this very moment, might be an accurate perception of the quantum potentials bubbling up from the foundations of your mind. This line of inquiry propels us to the most profound implication of all, the very nature of reality itself. In classical physics, a clear line is drawn between the observer and the observed. The universe is out there, a solid objective reality that exists independently of whether anyone is looking at it. But in the quantum world, this line dissolves. The act of observation is not passive, it is creative. It is the act of measurement that collapses the wave function, forcing the universe to abandon its state of ghostly potential and commit to a single concrete reality. This measurement problem is the central, unresolved mystery of quantum physics. What exactly counts as an observer? If the brain is a quantum system, if consciousness is tied to the collapse of the wave function, then we are forced to confront a staggering possibility. What if we, as conscious beings, are the solution to the measurement problem? What if the universe required the evolution of quantum minds to bring its own reality into focus? This is not to say we create reality with our thoughts in a simplistic sense. The moon is still there when no one is looking, but it suggests that the defined classical world we experience, a world of solid objects with definite properties, is a reality that is co-created by our conscious observation. Consciousness, in this view, is the mechanism by which the universe becomes aware of itself, the process by which quantum probability crystallizes into classical certainty. You are not just a spectator in the cosmic theater. You are a participant in the ongoing creation of the show. Every moment of your conscious awareness is an act of collapsing possibilities, of taking the shimmering, uncertain quantum foam and rendering it into the concrete world you perceive. This would mean that the separation between mind and matter, the internal and external worlds, is an illusion. We are not minds in a universe. We are an inextricable part of a universe that is in some fundamental way mental. Our brains are not just processors of an external reality. They are conduits through which reality itself achieves a state of being. We are the universe's way of knowing itself. So where does this leave us? We stand at a crossroads, armed with a question that reverberates through the foundations of science, philosophy, and our own self-conception. Does the human brain operate like a quantum computer? The honest answer is, we do not know. We have no final proof, no settled theory. We have a collection of brilliant, daring hypotheses, a handful of intriguing experimental results, and a mountain of unanswered questions. The orthodox view remains that the brain is a classical system, and that the strange rules of the quantum world are safely confined to the subatomic realm, having no meaningful role to play in the grand theatre of cognition. But to dismiss the possibility out of hand is to turn our back on one of the most exciting and potentially transformative frontiers of human knowledge. The quest to find out is in itself a noble and necessary endeavour. It has forged unprecedented collaborations, bringing neuroscientists and quantum physicists, computer scientists and philosophers together into a shared intellectual space. They are designing new experiments, searching for the telltale signatures of quantum effects in biological systems. They are building sophisticated models, testing the theoretical limits of what is possible. They are pushing the boundaries of what we thought we could ask, let alone answer. This journey is not just about finding a new model for the brain. It is about our willingness to confront the deepest mysteries of our own existence with courage and imagination. It forces us to question our most basic assumptions about life, consciousness, and the fabric of the cosmos. Accepting that even subtle quantum effects might influence our minds would change everything. It would not just be another scientific discovery. It would be a fundamental re-enchantment of our world. It would suggest we are more than just biological machines. It would paint a portrait of humanity as something far stranger, far more deeply connected to the universe, and far more mysterious than we have ever dared to imagine. The final answer may lie decades or even centuries in the future, or it may forever remain just beyond our grasp, but the pursuit itself will undoubtedly illuminate the path forward, revealing unforeseen truths about both the brain and the quantum universe. The quest is the destination, and as we continue to probe the enigma of the conscious mind, we may find that the strange and beautiful rules that govern the heart of the atom are the very same rules that give rise to the thoughts, feelings, and awareness that allow us to contemplate it all. The mystery of the quantum world outside us, and the mystery of the conscious world within us, may ultimately prove to be two sides of the same magnificent coin. The search has only just begun.